I've got to tell you right now, I'm in Papaw mode. I see all these kids up here, and that gets me excited. I've got grandchildren, so I just love children. In fact, I've got a 9-year-old granddaughter. I've got several of them, but she's the last one. She's got me wrapped around a little pinky, you know what I'm saying? So every Friday, she plans on coming to Papaw's house. And she will call me up before she comes and say, "Papaw, do you have any ice cream?" And I'll say, "Well, Indy, you better believe it." She said, "Well, I need chocolate with it too." I said, "Well, if I don't have any, I will get some here before you arrive." Now, the other day, her mom and dad don't like that. They don't like it at all. But that's okay. When she's at my house, it's Papaw rules. The other day, she got caught, though, because she sat in the living room. They came to pick her up. She still had a streak of chocolate on her face. And her daddy said, "What is that?" And she goes, "Oh." And she rubbed her face real good like that. But I tell you what, I love children. Looking at these kids, that's exciting. Any church that has a passel of kids like this up here is in good shape. The next generation and building on it. Man, it's good to be with you guys. I am excited to be here today. I'm sorry my wife couldn't join us. We just got back from Ethiopia on Thursday night. And she caught something over there and she got dressed to come down last night, but just couldn't make it, so I'd appreciate the prayer. She's usually the one that talks about the prayer cards. So back on the table after service, come by and see me. I've got some prayer cards. Would love for you to take one. One of the most vital ministries you can do is pray for missionaries. Because where we go and what we do, it's a constant spiritual battle that sometimes manifests itself in political problems. It manifests itself in car problems, in confrontations, and all kinds of difficulties. So we need people who will pray for us. My wife always says this too. She said, "Put this on your refrigerator or in your Bible, whichever one you open the most." Okay? It's got our information on it, email address, it's got our phone numbers. We would love to hear from you. It's also got a little Q thing there. What do you call them? Yeah, it's got one of those, whatever that is. I'm aging myself. You know, Pastor, I don't feel like an old dude until I walk in front of the mirror, and then I wish that had never invented them. You know, it does things to you. Takes care of your ego. Well, let me tell you what we're doing. So, give you a little history on us. We started out in 1991, went to Sierra Leone, and worked there for a little over 3.5 years and had to leave because there was a conflict that had spilled over and just took over the whole country. And we relocated to the country of Senegal, and we spent some time in Senegal working in church planting and leadership training. It was 95% Muslim, so it was a very challenging context. And we just believe that God's going to continue to touch that country. But then we got to travel all over Africa, visited a lot of different places. My wife and I worked with, we went into slum areas and did feeding programs and just did all kinds of ministry. And I spent one term back around 2010, 12, 13, 14 in working for Life Publishers. Got to travel to Asia some on that. Worked again in Southern Africa and Mozambique doing some projects there with Fire Bibles. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Fire Bibles, right? If you don't know what they are, it's a Pentecostal study Bible that we are translating into various languages around the world. But to make a long story short, back in 2014, we had a tragedy that struck our family, and we lost a son. And we were in no shape for ministry for a while, so we stepped out and went to Phoenix, Arizona, where my oldest son was planting a church. And so we helped him for that period of time and got to hang out with 3 of my 5 grandchildren, which worked a lot of healing in us. But I felt like some things were undone. And God began to deal with us about going back to Africa where things started. And, you know, I argued with the Lord a little bit because I'm an old guy. I'm approaching retirement and just didn't know if I was worthy or not. But the Lord began to deal with us. So we re-signed up to go back to Africa. And we're hoping to leave sometime this midsummer. I'm hoping. We got to raise a budget. And, of course, if you want to give, you can just scan that code on the back of the prayer card. Any amount is fine. If you're at the coffee shop one day and God speaks to you, you can give the price of a cup of coffee. That'll help keep us over there. We need that. I'm just going to be flat out honest with you. We have to raise a budget before we can go. But what we're going to do is base out of the country of Togo. Now, Togo is a little strip of a country. It doesn't have a lot of political significance. It's not an economic giant. It doesn't have a lot of people like Nigeria or some of the other countries, but it's strategic for one reason. There are 49 countries in sub-Saharan Africa that we work in, and every single one of those send their leaders and pastors to be trained at a couple of schools that we've got in Togo. So I'm going to base out of there and identify individuals who have a calling to go to unreached people groups. How many of you know what a people group is? I'm a people group. I'm an Arkansan, born and bred. When I was out in Arizona, I knew someone was from Arkansas in Walmart one day because I heard them say they were fixing to do something. I said, those are my people there. A people group shares a common heritage. They share a common worldview. They share culture, language, the whole works. Most people don't realize it, but Africa is a vast continent. All these nations, the Sahara Desert, you can take the whole United States and place it inside the Sahara Desert. There are thousands of languages. Any country you go to will have 50 to 100 languages, sometimes more. Yet there are all these distinct people groups who do not have access to the gospel. How many of you on your way here this morning passed by another church? More than one. Why are you here? You had another choice, didn't you? You could have gone to another church. You chose to come here. Pastor's happy you did. These people groups out here that we call unreached have no access to a church whatsoever. No gospel access. Many of them do not have a Bible in their own language. Many of them have never met a Christian in their entire lives. Or if they did, it was a brief conversation that didn't really present the gospel. We call those unreached and unengaged people groups. I want to see that changed. In Africa, we have got 287 distinct people groups numbering over 300 million people that have no gospel access. I want you to think about that for just one moment. No gospel access whatsoever. No church. They could walk all day long and not find a church and not meet a Christian. So they don't know who Jesus is. They don't have the opportunity to worship him like you and I do. My wife and I want to change that. We want to start working on individual people groups one at a time. Identify an African evangelist or missionary who will go and help us and reach those people. I just came back from Ethiopia. We landed Thursday night. We were over there to do some training about crossing cultures. Ethiopia has hundreds of people groups. They have about 30 that are unengaged. We targeted 4 of those that we're going to try to send people to those people groups. We discussed for 2 weeks ways that we can do that, ways that they can cross the border into those areas and preach that gospel. Now, don't misunderstand me. This is not an easy challenge. They're unreached for a reason. They're hard to get to. Many of them are hostile to Christianity. Many of them are Muslim. But I believe that the gospel is able to penetrate those strongholds. I believe that those people too can hear the gospel. I want to partner with people like a gentleman I met a few years ago. His name was Mawusi. He's an old man. I'd like to say he's a little older than I was, but I'm not sure. I just began to talk to him. I asked him how he became a Christian. I like to know how people become a believer. I remember my conversion. You're talking about your mom. My dad was pastoring a country church down in Amity, Arkansas, and they were having a revival. It was 10:30 at night, past my bedtime. And I asked Mom if I could go out and sleep in the car. I was about 6, 7 years old. I went out, laid down in the back seat, and God was in the car. He met me there. And I got saved. I gave my life to Jesus. Now, it was the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. 7 years old. I asked my wife, I said, how did you come to Jesus? He said, well, I was walking to a clan village. He said, now keep in mind, in the clan I was part of, he said, we didn't have any churches in any of our villages. He said, so I was walking to this village, as I got closer, I could hear something on an amplifier, someone talking. He said, as I got closer, I could see this tent. And there were several people from the village, a couple of hundred people from the village underneath that tent. And they were showing a film. He said, then I got a little closer and I could start making out the words of what was being said. Now, put it in context. A missionary had set up the tent, was showing the Jesus film, which has been translated into over 2,000 languages and dialects around the world. So Mawusi gets up there and he says, I can start to hear. And he says, they're speaking my language. He said, I didn't understand. They're speaking my language. He said, I was shocked. Keep in mind, most of the tribes and people groups that I've studied have a worldview that there's a creator God. The creator God made everything and everybody. But at some point in time, he got disappointed, disgusted with human behavior, that he decided he was going to leave humans to their own devices, and he retreated to some far corner of the universe. He is no longer accessible. Pray all you want, it's not going to reach him. So you have to pray to another deity in hopes that the creator might hear about it through that network. So that's his worldview. So for him to say, God speaks my language, you see, God's been inaccessible in his worldview. And suddenly, he's hearing God speaking on the screen. He said, I was blown away, Pastor. He said, I couldn't believe it. God speaks my language, which means God knows who I am. God knows me. He said, I walked underneath that tent that day, and he said, I changed every allegiance I had and gave it to Jesus Christ. He said, from that point forward, everywhere that missionary went, I followed him. I tagged along. And he taught me things. And he said, I took down the equipment when we needed to leave, and I put it up in the next place and set up the cameras and set up the tent. And then we would take it down when we were done there. He said, I did that for a year. Now, the missionary is now deceased. He's from Oklahoma, Mel Hill. But Mel Hills would set up that tent. And Mawusi followed him around everywhere. He said after a year, the missionary came up to him one day, pulled out of his pocket a set of keys for a new motorcycle. He said, Mawusi, I'm giving you a new motorcycle. He said, now, what we've been doing together, you're going to do by yourself from this point forward. You're going to go to the next village that doesn't have a church. You're going to set up the tent. You're going to show the film, and you're going to preach the word to those people. And God's going to save people through you. He said, that's what I did. He said, I packed everything up, went to the next village on my motorcycle, set up the tent, all the equipment, showed the film, and preached. I said, what happened? He said, well, they threw rocks at me. I said, brother, what'd you do? He said, well, I just kept preaching until they quit throwing rocks. He said, I stayed in that place till there was enough people that we could call for a pastor to come take over the church. And then I went to the next village. In the next village, he says there was a witch doctor there that didn't like it that I came. And so he came out and cursed me, placed a curse on me. He cursed my equipment. He cursed the tent. He cursed the ground I walk on. I said, what did you do, brother? He said, well, I preached to an empty audience, and I showed the film, and nobody was there. And I preached. He said, I just kept doing that every day. And they began one by one to see that I wasn't dying. The equipment was still working. The tent was still standing. They started coming out. He said, we had revival. He said, I stayed in that place until we had enough people I could call for a pastor to come take over the work. Other places he was beaten. Many times he encountered some incredible forces of darkness against him. There's too many things to recount that happened to that man. But I asked him, I said, how many churches did you plant? He said, I went to 43 villages while I was doing that. And I left those villages with 43 churches. I believe with all of my heart that if we can find people like Mausi who have that passion, dedication, willing to face the devil in the eye, no matter the obstacle, if we can find people like that, we can have some of those people groups change from an unreached status to an engaged, reached status, where we can plant the church and we can get them the gospel and they'll have access to who Jesus is. I want to tell you why. John Piper, Baptist guy, wrote a book called Let the Nations Be Glad. Did you know the Bible is all about God's love for people? God's love for the nations. Genesis 12, verse 1 through 3, God says to Abraham, I'm going to bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and through you all nations will be blessed. The original word for nations is ethne, where we get the word ethnicity from. When the Bible speaks in most instances about the nations, he's talking about people groups, distinct people groups who have a language maybe different from yours, but he's talking about those people. God loves those people. The good news goes out to the peoples of the world. Why? John Piper says the reason we still have missions is because we don't have worship. Until that day comes when every knee bows and every tongue confesses that Jesus Christ is Lord, there's going to be the necessity of people like me who go and people like you who send. Because it all comes down to a final scene. If you fast forward, you go to heaven, Revelation 7 and 9, there's going to be a day where people from every language, every tribe, every people, every nation is going to walk before the throne and bow before the Lamb, and they're going to proclaim him worthy. And I'm going to be one of those people. My Arkansas folks are going to be there. But there's going to be some people from Ghana there too. Right, brothers? There's going to be a lady from the Congo that's going to be there, right? People from Dubai. People from Saudi Arabia. It's going to happen someday. But we've got to be intentional and target those places that have no gospel access. So that's what Karen and I are going to do. And we believe God's going to do some incredible things. All right, let's take a 5-second pause. Get out your bottle. Make a toast. All right, that's much better. You can already tell the change. Let's come over. Open your Bibles to the book of Genesis. Remember, I just mentioned Genesis chapter 12. Chapter 15, God reiterates that same call. Expand on it a little bit. He tells Abraham to go out and count the stars. See if you remember them. He said, so shall your descendants be. And I will establish my covenant with you and with your family, with your people. Nations are going to come from you. Here was a man who, his name was still Abram, exalted father. God would later change his name to Abraham, father of a multitude. I'd like to go around walking with that identity, and he had no children. But God made him a promise. They just kept getting older and older and older. Finally, it comes to a head. Sarah decides, I'm going to help God. Chapter 16. If you don't mind, I'm going to call them Abraham and Sarah. It's a little bit more simpler. Maybe it's not that way in the text at this point. I want to begin to read. It says, now, Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abraham, I need the microphone, I guess. The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. I just want to say before I get into this, please let God do what God does. He doesn't need your help. Doesn't need my help. If he makes you a promise, he's going to keep it in his own time and his own way. And it's going to look entirely impossible from your perspective. That's okay, because God wants it absolutely crystal clear that he's the one doing it. And you didn't have a thing to do with that. You just listened and obeyed. Unfortunately, Sarah didn't do that. Abraham agreed, it says, to what Sarah said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarah said to Abraham, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now she knows she's pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your servant is in your hands, Abraham said. Do with her whatever you think best. And Sarah mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. And the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, she answered. And the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress, submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that will be too numerous for you to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you're now with child, and you'll have a son. You'll name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. Verse 13, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me, for she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. May the Lord bless his word. This is going to be a brief sermon. I just want to talk about three little things. So you get Hagar. Hagar is called a maidservant, and that's a euphemism. Really, it's a good word for slave. That's what she was. She was purchased when Abraham and Sarah were in Egypt. She had been with them 10 years. I don't know if at this point she had become a worshiper of Yahweh, or if she was still clinging to those Egyptian gods that she had left in her past. I don't know. But in this particular instance, she is a slave. Now, a slave is property. They do not have a value beyond what they can contribute to the person who owns them. They've been bought. They get up when they're told to get up. They go to bed when they're told to go to bed. They eat last if they eat at all. They are treated literally as property because that's what they are. And one of the things I want you to notice, it says here that Sarah took her maidservant and gave her to Abraham. The word took implies to me that that was not a choice on her part. It was not something that she willingly surrendered to do. It was something that she was told she had to do. And she got pregnant. When she got pregnant, she begins to think, maybe my fortunes will change, because I'm going to give Abraham his first child that Sarah cannot give him. Maybe by doing that, my son will inherit, because the firstborn typically inherits. Maybe by doing this, I will get out of my servitude. Maybe my progeny will no longer be slaves and will not live under the bondage of this life. Maybe. I'm sure she had great aspirations at that point, great dreams of what might be. But you see, she was not the child, not going to give the child of promise to Abraham. That was going to come later. This was the child of the slave woman, born into slavery. And no matter what she wished it to be, it was not going to be that way. So she flees. She goes down on the desert road to the desert Shur. There, the angel of the Lord speaks to her, tells her to go back. She says, you're going to have a son, and he's going to be named Ishmael. Ishmael is the father of all the Arabs. We might not have that conflict that we always have in the Middle East, except for this particular event. Does God love the Arabs? Yes, he does. He loved Hagar. He loved Ishmael. The word Ishmael means God hears. Now, my wife accuses me quite often of letting something go in one ear and out the other. It's a man thing, I do believe. I'm really trying to listen, but I've got concentration problems too, so all kinds of things. I don't listen as well as I would like to. But I want to tell you this about God. You may be praying about something, and you've been praying about something, and you've been seeking God about something. You don't think he's listening. Kind of like Sarah, you want to help God out and get this thing going. But I want to tell you this, that God has heard you. He's been listening. He's been paying attention. Why? Because he values you. He values you just as you are. You're important to him. And I found that when people find something they're interested in, they pay it a lot of attention. They give it their time, their effort, their will, their way. It's valuable to them. So they will spend a lot of time on that. God spends a lot of time listening. He's hearing. When you're praying about that job, God's been listening. When you're praying about the finances, God's been listening. When you're praying about somebody who's sick, God has been listening. He's paying attention. Don't think he's not. So he's listening to you today. Why? Because you are his valued possession. He loves you. So he's paying attention. Second of all, she did something that no one had done at this point. I don't know that anyone ever did. Hagar gave God a name. No one else had ever done that. God always revealed who he was. She said, I have seen the God who has seen me. I've encountered God, in other words, and God is watching me. She called him El Roy, the God who sees. When my oldest son was born in DeQueen, Arkansas, a hospital that no longer exists, I went to the nursery when he was born, and you know how they bring him in and set him there on the thing, and they got a little tag on it. It said Jester kid, 21 inches long, 7 pounds, 8 ounces. I thought he was a whopper, and that's not real big, but he was just huge to me. And he had this overly large head like his daddy. Nose, ears, the works. And I said, well, at least I know he's mine. I was absolutely amazed. Thank God he grew out of that. You know, he looks more like his mom now. But I was absolutely amazed when I looked upon him. I said, this is my son, my DNA. I loved that child from the moment I saw him. I couldn't contain it all. And then it happened again when my daughter Jill was born. And those big old blue eyes looked at me for the first time. And I was smitten. And then my youngest son, Benjamin, came out with the curliest head of hair you ever saw. But he looked just like me. And it did it again. And I've come to realize through being a parent and a grandfather how much God loves us, how much he's watching us. We sometimes get this false idea that God's like Santa Claus. He's keeping a list of who's naughty and nice, and he's just waiting for you to fall so he can jump on you and say, I told you so. The Ancient of Days, sitting on the throne, all scary with thunder and lightning. Yeah, that's who he is. But he's also that one that bends down, picks up that little child, puts it on his knee, puts his arm around that little child, kisses it on the head. And his heart is just bursting over with love. That's how much he cares for you. That's how much he's watching you. He's watching for you so he can pick you up. He's looking at you so he can embrace you. He's just waiting on you to see him there so he can do that. He's the God who sees. He's the God who heals those things that are broken. If you go back to this text and you read here, she was on the road to Shur. And there was a spring out in that desert where she stopped. The spring gave her life. You know, I've learned living in Phoenix, if you don't drink water, you're going to shrivel up and die. All right, we got a 5-second pause. My voice is fading, so I want to take care of it. Oh, instant relief. So, yeah, I used to get out in my car and sit down, and it would be 150 degrees in that car. It would melt you like butter. It's hard. So you can imagine being in a desert without water. She had to live. She drank from that spring, and it provides sustenance. In chapter 22, you're going to read a more enlarged story about another episode that takes off where she eventually does leave for good. And it's a spring of water that saves her and her and her child. And I'm thinking the whole time that this spring system throughout the desert, there are places to access it. But a lot of things can happen in your life over time that can ruin the taste of the water and make it undrinkable. Fast forward to Exodus chapter 15. Children of Israel cross the Red Sea. They go into the desert, and it's the same desert. They encounter a spring there on their journey, and it was bitter. They couldn't drink out of it. All those years they've been in slavery. When they're trying to leave, the source of water that they were looking toward in the desert had become bitter. The system wasn't drinkable anymore. Events in our life can cause what used to be pure and life-giving to become unsustainable in our lives. That happened to me. The date was June the 2nd, or December 2nd. Year was 2014, December 2nd. I was scheduled to fly to Turkey. We were going to start a Fire Bible project there with one of the languages. And for whatever reason, I just felt like I shouldn't go on this trip. I just shouldn't go. So I canceled the ticket and told everyone that I was not going to accompany them on this trip. I needed to be home. On the 7th, 5 days later, 6 a.m. in the morning, I get a phone call. And it was from a police detective. And he told me, he said, "Mr. Jester, I am at your front door. I need to speak with you." And I hung up the phone. I said, "I'll be right there." And my wife said, "Who was that?" I said, "Well, it's a policeman. And they're probably here about Ben. Ben is our youngest son. The one I told you is born curly-headed, you know. Ben was the kind of person that he walked into a room, you either liked him right off the bat or didn't. One way or the other. He just has that kind of personality. You like him or you don't. He was often making poor choices. Didn't use sound judgment. Just a big old smile on his face all the time. But he was always doing things that just he shouldn't be doing. Hanging out with people he shouldn't be hanging out with. From my perspective. We sit down in the living room with the two detectives that walked through the door. They didn't give us much of anything other than to say, "Are you Ben Jester's parents?" I said, "Yes, we are." And they said, "Well, we're sorry to tell you this, but he was shot last night and he didn't make it." And I didn't understand that. It didn't make any sense to me because I'd just seen him a few hours earlier. My last words to him were, "Ben, I love you," as I dropped him off at someone's house. So I couldn't fathom that he's not going to come walking through that door like he did the previous night. So I went through this little short period of denial. Then the grief starts to set in. And the grief was like a tsunami that just knocked me down at times. Literally. I couldn't even stand on my feet. And it happened at most awkward times. But after that, depression set in. And anger. I was never so angry in all my life that my son had been taken away. I had great plans for Ben, you see. Ben was one of those kind of people, you know, I told you if people like him or didn't. He was one of those kind of people that when we lived in Africa, he would roam the streets and he'd meet people. He'd sit down and talk to them and he'd eat their food. We had a Muslim neighbor right next door that he had 4 legal wives and 2 that he didn't officially marry, you know, to stay within the Quranic codes. And he had about 20 kids. They were all between the ages of about 5 to 12. They had their own football team, what we would call soccer. My son every day would jump the wall and go play with them. And if he didn't show up, 1 or 2 of the wives would come over to my house looking for him. And they'd always say, we have him a plate of food over there. He eats with us all the time. Where is he? And he got to be so well known that when we were in Freetown, that city was about 2 million people back then. When we would drive through Freetown, people would wave at us and go, Benjamin, Benjamin. They knew my son. And I would sit back and say, God, what are you going to do with him? This is incredible. He's going to be the greatest evangelist Africa ever saw for a white man. I just really had these high hopes for him. And I couldn't understand why God would let this happen. And I wanted to get my hands, Pastor, I'm admitting right now, I wanted to get my hands on the person who did this. I so longed to do that. I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I didn't find out where they live. The man, 4 years later, was found guilty of my son's murder, but that didn't bring Ben back. My life had become a bitter spring. I'm going to ask the musicians to come back, if they would right now. Victor, where are you at, Victor? He's coming. He's coming. So, little by little, God began to bring healing in our lives. Our grandchildren helped out with that a lot, especially Indy Mae. She's still the youngest, and you know the youngest get treated real special. I had a lady walked up to us and she said, I met your son several years ago, and the first time I ever met him, he gave me a Bible and he asked me out on a date. That's something I never tried, but it sounds like a good deal. There were 2 or 3 other young ladies that told me kind of a similar story. I met Ben, he gave me a Bible, he asked me out on a date. One of Ben's best friends, a guy by the name of Josh. Josh told me, he said, Ben gave me a Bible the first time I met him, signed his name in it, said to my friend, Josh. They became best friends. And he told me, he said, I still have that Bible in my nightstand, and I read it every night. There were times that the kind of people I saw Ben hanging out with were not my kind of people. And I made a lot of judgments about those people and stereotypes about those people. But one of them comes up to me and she says, I owe my marriage to Ben. He saved my marriage. I said, how so? She said, Ben and my husband were in jail together. I said, yeah, that sounds about right. Sounds like Ben. She said, but my husband had never met a Christian until he met Ben. I said, no, that does not compute. Ben in jail, yes. Ben jail, Christian, no. She said, oh yeah. She said, every night as they were in that cell, your son would tell him about Jesus, tell my husband about Jesus, and they would read the scriptures together. And every night they prayed together. She said, when my husband got out of jail, he was an absolutely changed man. She said, in fact, he would call around to try to find out churches that were open on Monday night or Tuesday night or Thursday night, Friday night or Wednesday night if they weren't having church. She said, he just wanted to be in church all the time. She said, Ben did that by telling my husband about Jesus. Another young lady, I had met Rachel at Ben's house one night. I went over there and there's about 20 people in that house. And again, I made a judgment call on who these people were and what they were doing there. And she said, Rachel said, I don't know if you remember me or not, but I saw you the night you came to Ben's house and you didn't look too happy when you left. She said, what you don't know about me was I was in an abusive relationship with a guy who beat me regularly. And she said, Ben found out about it. He told me to come and sleep on his couch, and that person would never bother me again. She said, so I did. She said, I didn't know what I was going to do, so Ben gave me a job, let me work with him, paid me enough that I saved up my money and got me an apartment. And he introduced me to one of his good friends from school. She said, I'm married to him now. I'm a registered nurse. My husband's a construction supervisor. She said that all happened because Ben said, my couch is available to you and nobody's going to bother you. I found out my son was working with people in ways I didn't understand. People I wouldn't want to hang out with because I made a judgment call about them. So at that point in my life, my well had become bitter. And it was not sustaining. It wasn't sustaining for me. But God, little by little, began to work a miracle in my heart. What did God tell Moses to do at the spring called Mara, bitter water? What did God do there? God told Moses to take that chunk of wood and throw it in the water, and it became sweet. And once again, the people were able to drink. Once again, life was restored. You know what that chunk of wood was? I have no clue. Who knows? I don't know what kind it was. Scholars want to guess. Who cares? It was a type. It was a type of the cross where Jesus' blood spilled out on the ground. It signified that the only way that we're going to find joy in life is through what Jesus has done for us and accepting it into our heart and our lives. I don't know your journey. I don't know where you've come from, where you've been, what's going on in your life. I don't know any of that. But you see, God has been paying attention. God has been listening to you. He's been watching you. He wants to bring healing into that part of your life. He wants to show you that He loves you more than anything else. I was a broken person, but God, little by little, put things back together for me. Maybe you're here. There's some broken things going on in your life, in your relationships, in your family. I don't know. But if that's you, if you're going through something, I want to ask you to come stand right up here real quick. And we want to pray for you. I'm going to count 5. On the count of 5, just get up and come right down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'd like to believe there's several of you that need to come down, so don't hesitate, just come on. I'm going to be right down there with you because we're all in some way broken. We need wholeness and healing through Christ, and He's the only one that can truly do that. I'm going to ask Pastor to come. Anyone who would like to come and help us pray, you can stand behind these people in front of them. We're going to pray for them and ask God to work a miracle in their life. And if you're just going to sit back there, then I'm going to ask you to do so prayerfully. Reach out your hand toward these individuals and let's pray for them.